I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing down the navy blue dress I'd bought specifically for tonight. 62 years old, and I was still fussing over my appearance like a nervous teenager. My reflection showed silver hair that I'd spent 2 hours at the salon perfecting, laugh lines that had deepened over the decades, and eyes that held both excitement and apprehension. "This is ridiculous, Margaret," I whispered to myself, adjusting the pearl necklace my daughter had given me for my 60th birthday. "It's just a high school reunion. You're going for fun, remember?" But my trembling hands as I applied one final coat of lipstick betrayed the truth. This wasn't just about reconnecting with old classmates or satisfying curiosity about who had gotten fat, who had gone bald, or who had made it big. Deep down, in a place I rarely allowed my thoughts to venture, I wondered if he would be there. Michael Davidson, the boy who had owned my heart completely during our senior year, then shattered it into 1,000 pieces 3 weeks before graduation when he announced he was enlisting in the Marines and couldn't tie himself down to anyone. The boy who had kissed me under the bleachers after every football game, who had promised we'd figure out our future together, who had looked into my eyes and said he loved me more than anything in the world. The boy who had left town without saying goodbye. I grabbed my small purse and car keys, checking my appearance one more time. The dress flattered my figure well enough. I'd kept myself in decent shape over the years, thanks to yoga classes and daily walks around the neighborhood. My late husband Robert used to joke that I had better legs at 50 than most women had at 30. Robert. Dear, sweet Robert, who had loved me faithfully for 38 years, who had never once made me feel like a second choice, who had died peacefully in his sleep 2 years ago, leaving me with beautiful memories and an aching loneliness I was still learning to navigate. The drive to the Marriott downtown took 25 minutes, giving me plenty of time to second-guess my decision. I could still turn around, go home, pour myself a glass of wine, and watch Netflix in my pajamas. Nobody would know I'd chickened out. My daughter Sarah certainly wouldn't judge me. She'd been encouraging me to get back out there ever since I'd finished grieving properly. But as I pulled into the hotel parking lot and saw the familiar faces walking toward the entrance, faces that had aged and changed but still held echoes of the teenagers I'd once known, I felt a flutter of genuine excitement. Linda Morrison, now Linda Chen according to her name tag, spotted me immediately and rushed over with arms outstretched. "Margaret Whitman, oh my God, you look absolutely fantastic." She enveloped me in a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and hairspray. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Well, curiosity got the better of me," I admitted, allowing myself to be swept along toward the registration table. The hotel ballroom was decorated with our school colors, burgundy and gold, and enlarged yearbook photos from our senior year were displayed on easels around the room. Seeing those young faces, frozen in time with their confident smiles and hopeful eyes, made my chest tighten with something I couldn't quite name. I accepted my name tag and complimentary drink ticket, scanning the room automatically. Groups of people clustered around high-top tables, animated conversations punctuated by bursts of laughter and exclamations of recognition. The popular kids seemed to have gravitated toward each other just like old times, though their designer clothes and subtle cosmetic procedures couldn't quite hide the fact that we were all approaching or had passed retirement age. "Looking for someone special?" Linda asked, following my gaze with a knowing smile. "Just getting my bearings," I replied, but felt heat rise in my cheeks. Had I been that obvious? "He's here, you know," she said quietly. "Michael Davidson arrived about an hour ago with his wife." His wife? Of course he was married. What had I expected? That he'd been pining away from me all these decades, remaining single and heartbroken? The rational part of my brain had always known he'd moved on, probably married young, had children, built a life that had nothing to do with the girl he'd left behind in our small Ohio town. "That's nice," I managed, taking a sip of my wine to steady myself. "I hope he's happy." Linda studied my face carefully. "Margaret, honey, I probably shouldn't have mentioned it. I know you two had a thing back in the day." "Ancient history," I interrupted, forcing a bright smile. "Robert and I had a wonderful marriage. I'm just here to catch up with old friends and see how everyone turned out." But even as I said the words, my eyes continued their involuntary sweep of the room. And then, as if drawn by some invisible thread that had remained unbroken despite 44 years of silence, I saw him. He was standing near the bar, his back to me, but I knew that profile immediately. His hair had gone completely gray and was thinner than I remembered, and his shoulders weren't quite as broad, but something about the way he held himself, the angle of his head when he laughed at something his companion was saying, transported me instantly to 18 years old. As if sensing my stare, he turned around. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, the noise and motion around us seemed to fade into background static. He looked older, of course. We all did. But his eyes were the same warm brown that had once gazed at me with such intensity I'd felt like the only girl in the world. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth, the same smile that had made me weak in the knees during calculus class. He raised his hand in a small wave, and I found myself waving back before I could think better of it. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. "I need to use the restroom," I mumbled to Linda, not waiting for her response before hurrying toward the ladies' room. I needed a moment to collect myself, to remember that I was a mature woman who had lived a full life, not a lovesick teenager whose world revolved around a boy's attention. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hotel bathroom, I stared at my reflection again. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright with something I hadn't seen there in a long time. I took several deep breaths, reminding myself of all the reasons why seeing Michael again meant nothing. I'd loved Robert completely and wholly. I'd raised 2 beautiful children, had a successful career as a high school English teacher, had traveled the world, had lived. But when I emerged from the bathroom and found him waiting in the hallway outside, all of that rational self-talk evaporated like morning mist. "Hello, Maggie," he said softly, using the nickname only he had ever called me. "Hello, Michael." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You look well." He laughed, and the sound was exactly the same as I remembered. "You're being kind. I look like an old man. But you..." He paused, studying my face with an expression I couldn't decipher. "You look beautiful. You always did." The compliment hit me harder than it should have, and I felt 16 again, desperate for his approval. "Thank you. How are you? Linda mentioned you're married." "Was married," he corrected gently. "Carol passed away 3 years ago. Cancer." "Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry." The condolence was automatic but genuine. I knew the particular ache of losing a life partner, the way it left you feeling unmoored in a world that suddenly seemed too large and empty. "Thank you." And I heard about Robert. He was a good man. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We stood there in the hallway, 2 widowed people in our 60s, surrounded by the ghosts of who we used to be. "Would you like to dance?" he asked suddenly, gesturing toward the ballroom where a live band was playing The Way You Look Tonight. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, even as every cell in my body screamed yes. "One dance," he said, "for old time's sake." Against my better judgment, I found myself following him onto the dance floor. When he took my hand and placed his other hand gently on my waist, muscle memory kicked in. We had danced together at prom, at school dances, at the few parties our parents had allowed us to attend. We fit together like puzzle pieces, even after all these years. As we swayed to the music, I caught glimpses of curious faces watching us. The Margaret Whitman and Michael Davidson show, 44 years in the making. I should have felt self-conscious, but instead I felt oddly peaceful for the first time in months. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his breath warm against my ear. "For what? For leaving the way I did, for not saying goodbye, for being too young and stupid to know what I was giving up." I pulled back to look at him, searching his face. "Michael, we don't need to do this. It was a long time ago. We were just kids." "Maybe," he said, "but I never forgot you, Maggie. I never forgot us." The song was ending, but neither of us moved to separate. I felt suspended in time, caught between the woman I'd become and the girl I'd once been, unsure which one was more real in this moment. "I should get back to Linda," I said finally, stepping away from his embrace. "It was good to see you." But as I walked away on unsteady legs, I could feel his eyes following me across the room, and I knew this conversation was far from over. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations with classmates whose names I struggled to remember, and faces that had changed almost beyond recognition. But I was hyper-aware of Michael's presence across the room, conscious of where he was standing, who he was talking to, whether he was looking in my direction. I tried to focus on the stories my old friends were telling: Linda's 3 grandchildren, Susan's recent retirement from nursing, Jim's successful real estate business, but my attention kept drifting. Several times I caught Michael's eye, and each time he smiled at me with an expression that made my stomach flutter like I was 18 again. By 10 o'clock, the crowd was beginning to thin. The older crowd, which I realized with a start now included me, was heading home to early bedtimes and morning medications. I said my goodbyes to Linda and the others, collected my purse, and headed toward the exit. The cool October air hit my face as I stepped outside, a welcome relief after the stuffy ballroom. I was fishing my keys out of my purse when I heard footsteps behind me. "Maggie, wait!" I turned to find Michael jogging toward me, slightly out of breath. Up close, under the parking lot lights, I could see the lines around his eyes more clearly, the way his jaw had softened with age, but his eyes were exactly the same, intense, searching, hopeful. "I was hoping we could talk," he said, "really talk, not just small talk in a crowded room." "I don't think that's a good idea," I repeated, but with less conviction than before. "There's a coffee shop down the street. It's probably still open." I should have said no. I should have gotten in my car and driven home to my quiet house with its framed photos of Robert and me, to my book club novels and my Thursday night phone calls with Sarah. I should have left the past in the past where it belonged. Instead, I heard myself saying, "1 cup of coffee, then I'm going home." The coffee shop was nearly empty, just a few college students hunched over laptops and a couple sharing a piece of cheesecake in the corner booth. Michael ordered black coffee. I got decaf with cream, the same way I'd ordered it in high school when we used to study together at the diner on Main Street. We sat across from each other in the booth by the window, and I was struck by how surreal the whole situation was. 2 months ago, the biggest decision I faced was whether to plant tulips or daffodils in my spring garden. Now I was sitting across from my first love, trying to reconcile the middle-aged man before me with the boy who had broken my heart. "Tell me about your life," he said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. "I know you taught English, that you had 2 kids. Linda filled me in on some of it, but tell me the real story." So I did. I told him about meeting Robert at a college mixer, how he'd been so different from Michael, steady, reliable, content to build a quiet life. I told him about our wedding, our struggles with fertility, the joy when Sarah finally arrived, followed 2 years later by her brother David. I shared stories about teaching, about the kids who drove me crazy, and the ones who made it all worthwhile. I told him about Robert's illness, the long months of watching him fade, the strange relief mixed with grief when he finally let go. Michael listened without interrupting, nodding at the right moments, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, we sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Your turn, I said. What about Carol, your family? His story was different but equally rich. He'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, come home changed but not broken. Carol had been a nurse at the VA hospital where he'd received treatment for a minor shrapnel wound. They'd married in 1972 and had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. He'd worked construction for 30 years, eventually starting his own company. Carol's battle with ovarian cancer had lasted 2 brutal years. She knew, he said quietly. At the end, she knew about you. She'd always known, I think. She told me it was okay to remember you fondly. That first love was different than married love, but both were real. I felt tears prick my eyes. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was, just like Robert sounds like he was a wonderful man. He paused, studying my face. But that doesn't mean what we had wasn't real, Maggie. It doesn't mean it didn't matter. Michael, I started, but he held up his hand. I know this is crazy. I know we're not kids anymore, that we have whole lives behind us, families and responsibilities and complicated histories. But seeing you tonight, it's like the last 44 years just melted away. I stared down at my coffee, my heart racing. That's exactly what scares me. Why? Because I spent so many years getting over you. Because Robert deserved a wife who loved him completely, not someone who was always wondering what if. Because I finally stopped thinking about you every day. And now? I looked up at him, seeing the hope in his eyes, the same hope that had been there when we were 17, and he told me he wanted to marry me someday. Now I feel like I'm 18 again, and that terrifies me. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His skin was rougher now, marked with age spots and small scars, but his touch still sent electricity shooting up my arm. Maybe 18 wasn't such a bad age, he said softly. I should have pulled my hand away. Instead, I found myself turning my palm up to meet his, our fingers intertwining like they had so many times before. Outside the window, the October wind was picking up, sending leaves skittering across the empty street. I don't know how to do this, I whispered. I don't know how to be anything other than Robert's wife. You don't have to be anything right now except Maggie, he said. The same Maggie who used to sneak out to meet me at Miller's Pond. The same Maggie who wrote me love letters in the margins of her chemistry notes. I laughed despite myself, remembering those stolen moments, the intensity of young love that had made everything else in the world seem insignificant. We were so dramatic. We were passionate, he corrected. There's a difference. The barista started stacking chairs on tables around us, the universal signal that closing time was approaching. Michael glanced at his watch. I should let you get home, he said, but made no move to release my hand. Yes, I agreed, but didn't pull away either. We sat there for another few minutes, neither wanting to be the first to break the connection. Finally, the barista approached our table apologetically. Sorry, folks, but we're closing up. Of course, I said, quickly withdrawing my hand and reaching for my purse. We were just leaving. Outside the coffee shop, we walked slowly toward our cars. The night was crisp and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. My breath came out in small puffs of vapor. Maggie, Michael said as we reached my car. Could I see you again? Not at a reunion or in a crowded room, just us. I stood with my keys in my hand, torn between desire and practicality. I don't know if that's wise. Since when do you care about being wise? He asked with a smile. You're the girl who convinced me to climb the water tower just to carve our initials. That girl was 18 and bulletproof, I reminded him. This woman is 62 and fragile. You're not fragile, he said firmly. You raised 2 kids, buried a husband, taught high school for 30 years. You're the strongest person I know. Before I could respond, he stepped closer and gently cupped my face in his hands. I'm not asking you to run away with me or make any big decisions. I'm just asking for a chance to remember what it felt like to be happy." His thumbs brushed across my cheekbones, and I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch despite myself. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it might be like to have someone to share coffee with in the morning, to have strong arms to hold me when the loneliness got too heavy, to laugh again the way I used to laugh. But then reality crashed back in. "Michael, I can't. I'm not ready. I may never be ready." He dropped his hands but didn't step back. "I understand, but if you change your mind, I'm staying at the Hampton Inn through Wednesday, room 247. He kissed my forehead gently, a feather-light touch that somehow conveyed more tenderness than any passionate embrace could have. Then he walked away toward his rental car, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with my heart hammering and my carefully constructed life suddenly feeling too small. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of the evening. The house felt especially quiet when I let myself in, the silence almost oppressive after the noise and energy of the reunion. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in Robert's old chair, staring at our wedding photo on the mantel. "What would you want me to do?" I whispered to his smiling face. But Robert had never been the jealous type, had always wanted me to be happy. I could almost hear his voice. "Follow your heart, Maggie. Life's too short for regrets." But was my heart telling me to run toward Michael or away from him? And after all these years, did I even know the difference? I didn't sleep well that night. I tossed and turned, my dreams filled with images of Michael's face, both young and old, and memories I hadn't allowed myself to revisit in decades. I woke up at 5:30, earlier than usual, with a headache and a decision to make. By 7 o'clock, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee and my phone in my hand. Sarah always called on Sunday mornings, but I found myself wanting to talk to her before our usual time. "Mom, is everything okay?" Her voice was thick with sleep when she answered. "It's really early." "I'm sorry, honey. I went to my high school reunion last night, and I'm having a bit of a situation." That got her attention. "What kind of situation? Did something happen?" So I told her about Michael, about the dance, about the coffee shop, and his invitation. I tried to keep my tone light, like I was sharing an amusing anecdote, but Sarah knew me too well. "Mom, are you asking for my permission to go see him?" "I'm asking for your opinion," I said carefully. "Do you want to see him?" Such a simple question, but it cut right to the heart of things. Did I want to see him? Every cell in my body was screaming yes, but my rational mind was listing all the reasons why it was a terrible idea. "I think I do," I admitted quietly, "but I feel guilty about it." "Why?" "Because of your father, because I loved him so much, and it feels like a betrayal to be interested in someone else." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Mom, do you remember what Dad said when he was sick, right near the end?" I closed my eyes, remembering those last precious conversations. He said a lot of things. He said he didn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone. He said he wanted you to be happy, to find companionship if the opportunity presented itself. He made me promise to encourage you when the time was right. Tears started flowing down my cheeks. I remember. "Maybe this is the time, Mom. Maybe this is exactly what Dad would have wanted for you." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, watching the autumn sunlight slant through my windows. The house that had been my sanctuary for so many years suddenly felt like a prison. When had I become so afraid of living? At 10 o'clock, I found myself getting dressed with more care than I'd taken in months. I chose a soft green sweater that brought out my eyes, dark slacks that were flattering but not too dressy, and the gold earrings Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. The Hampton Inn was only 15 minutes from my house, but the drive felt like an eternity. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain my change of heart, but every speech sounded ridiculous in my head. I stood outside room 247 for a full minute before knocking, my heart pounding so hard I was sure other guests could hear it. When the door opened and Michael appeared, still in his pajamas with his hair sticking up at odd angles, the vulnerable look on his face made my chest tight. "Maggie, what are you doing here?" "I came to take you up on your offer," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt, if it still stands. The smile that spread across his face was like watching the sun rise. "It stands. Give me 5 minutes to shower and get dressed." "Actually," I said, stepping past him into the room, "could we just talk first? I need to say some things." He nodded and sat on the edge of the bed, his expression serious. I took the chair by the window, needing some distance to get the words out. "I loved my husband," I began, "completely and truly. But you were my first love, and that leaves a mark on your soul that never really goes away." Michael nodded but didn't interrupt. "I spent years getting over you, years learning to love Robert the way he deserved to be loved, not as a consolation prize, but as my chosen partner. And I did love him that way, eventually. But seeing you again, it's brought back feelings I thought I'd buried." "And that scares you?" "Terrifies me," I confirmed, "because I don't know how to separate the Michael you are now from the boy who left me." "I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or just nostalgia." He was quiet for a moment, then stood up and moved to the window. "Do you want to know why I really left? You enlisted. You said you couldn't tie yourself down." "That was only part of it." He turned back to face me. "The real reason was that I was scared. Scared of how much I loved you. Scared of disappointing you. Scared of not being good enough for the life you deserved." I stared at him. "What are you talking about? You were everything to me. You were headed to college, Maggie. You had big plans, dreams of being a writer, of seeing the world. I was a blue-collar kid whose dad worked construction when he wasn't drinking away his paycheck. I could see your parents' faces when they looked at me. They wanted better for you." "That wasn't their choice to make," I said, anger flaring. "It was mine." "You're right, but I was 18 and proud and stupid. I thought I was doing the noble thing by setting you free." "And how did that work out for us?" I asked bitterly. "I spent the first 2 years of college crying myself to sleep. You went to war and got hurt. We both married other people and lived our whole lives wondering what if. But we did live, Maggie. We had good lives, full lives. We loved and were loved. We raised families, contributed to our communities, made a difference. Maybe that's worth something." I felt some of the anger drain out of me. He was right, of course. Our lives hadn't been wasted or empty. We'd both found happiness, just not with each other. "So what do we do now?" I asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just know that when I saw you last night, for the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. Not the grieving widower, not the tired old man whose body is falling apart, just me." I understood exactly what he meant. The loneliness that had been my constant companion since Robert's death had lifted the moment Michael took my hand. "What if we try?" I heard myself saying. "Not to recapture what we had. We can't go back to being 18. But what if we try to see who we are now, at this stage of our lives?" Hope flickered in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm not sure of anything, but I'm tired of being careful all the time. I'm tired of playing it safe." He crossed the room and knelt in front of my chair, taking my hands in his. "We'll go slow," he promised. "No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people getting to know each other again." "Okay," I whispered. He raised my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles gently. "Okay." We spent the rest of the morning talking, really talking, about our fears, our hopes, our children, our losses. Michael told me about his nightmares from Vietnam, how Carol had patiently helped him heal. I told him about the dark months after Robert's death, how I'd questioned everything I thought I knew about myself. By noon, we were both starving, so we drove to a little diner outside of town where nobody would recognize us. Over pancakes and coffee, we shared stories about our grandchildren, our aches and pains, our complicated relationships with retirement and aging. I never thought I'd feel this way again, I admitted as we lingered over our third cup of coffee. At my age, I assumed romance was behind me. Maybe this is better than romance, Michael said thoughtfully. Maybe this is something deeper. Two people who've lived full lives, choosing to share whatever time they have left. The thought should have been sobering, but instead it filled me with a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. When he walked me to my car in the diner parking lot, I felt like a teenager again, uncertain about the protocol. Did we shake hands, hug, kiss? Michael seemed to be wrestling with the same question. Finally, he smiled and said, "This is probably going to sound ridiculous, but would you like to go to a movie tonight? Like a real date?" I laughed, feeling giddy and nervous and alive. "I'd love." "I'll pick you up at 7? "Perfect." He kissed my cheek, and I drove home with the radio turned up and the windows down, singing along to songs I hadn't heard in years. Our first real date was everything a high school reunion couldn't be: quiet, intimate, focused entirely on each other. Michael arrived at exactly 7 o'clock with a small bouquet of flowers, and I felt my heart skip when I opened the door to find him standing there in a navy blazer and tie. "You look beautiful," he said, handing me the flowers. "Thank you. So do you." And he did. Distinguished, handsome, in a way that had nothing to do with youth and everything to do with character and time well lived. We saw a romantic comedy that was probably too young for us, but we laughed anyway. And when Michael reached for my hand during the emotional climax, I didn't pull away. Afterward, we went for ice cream at a place that had been a teenage hangout during our high school days, though it had changed ownership several times since then. "Do you remember our first date?" Michael asked, as we sat on a bench outside the ice cream shop, sharing a sundae like we had 45 years earlier. "Miller's Pond," I said immediately. "You picked me up in your dad's pickup truck, and we went to that terrible drive-in movie." "Attack of the Giant Spiders," he recalled with a grin. "You screamed so loud the people in the next car complained." "You put your arm around me to protect me from the fake spiders," I countered. "I think that was your plan all along." "Guilty as charged." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the few other couples and families enjoy their evening treats. I felt peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced since before Robert got sick. Not the resigned acceptance I'd learned to live with, but actual contentment. "Maggie," Michael said suddenly, "can I ask you something personal?" "We're sharing ice cream and holding hands," I pointed out. "I think we're past the point of worrying about personal questions." "Do you think Robert would approve of this, of us?" The question caught me off guard, though I realized I'd been wondering the same thing all day. I thought about my husband's kind eyes, his generous heart, the way he'd always put my happiness above his own comfort. "Yes," I said finally, "I think he would." Robert was never threatened by the fact that I'd loved someone before him. He used to say it proved I was capable of deep love, which meant my love for him was that much more meaningful. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Carol felt the same way. She said she wasn't jealous of you. She was grateful to you for teaching me how to love completely." "They sound like they would have been friends," I observed. "I think they would have been." As Michael walked me to my door at the end of the evening, I felt the familiar flutter of first date nerves. What came next? We weren't teenagers anymore. The rules were different, more complicated. I had a wonderful time tonight, I said as we stood on my front porch under the soft glow of the porch light. So did I, he paused, studying my face. Would you like to have dinner tomorrow night? Maybe at that new Italian place downtown. I'd love to, but I can't tomorrow. My book club meets on Mondays and I'm hosting this week. Tuesday then. I smiled at his eagerness. Tuesday would be perfect. He leaned down and kissed me softly, and for a moment I was 18 again, dizzy with the thrill of new love. But when we broke apart, I saw the reflection of my own maturity in his eyes, the knowledge that this was precious precisely because we understood how rare and fleeting happiness could be. Sweet dreams, Maggie, he whispered. Sweet dreams, Michael. I watched him drive away before going inside, my lips still tingling from his kiss. The house felt different somehow, not empty, but full of possibility. Over the next 2 weeks, we settled into a pattern that felt both thrilling and natural. Michael extended his stay at the hotel, claiming he needed to visit some old friends in the area. We had dinner together 3 times, saw 2 more movies, and spent long afternoons walking through the park where we used to meet after school. He met my daughter Sarah when she came for her weekly visit, and I held my breath as they sized each other up over coffee in my kitchen. But Sarah, bless her heart, was charmed by his old-fashioned manners and his obvious devotion to me. I like him, Mom, she told me after he left to give us some privacy. He makes you smile again. Is that okay with you? I know it might seem disrespectful to your father's memory. Mom, stop. Sarah took my hands in hers, and for a moment our roles were reversed. She was the mother, comforting and guiding me. Dad's been gone for 2 years. You've mourned him properly, honored your marriage, raised us to be good people. Now it's time to think about what you want for the rest of your life. What if I'm making a mistake? What if this is just 2 lonely people clinging to each other? What if it's not? She countered. What if it's exactly what you both need? That night, Michael and I had what might have been our most honest conversation yet. We were sitting in his hotel room, something that still felt slightly scandalous to me, sharing a bottle of wine and Chinese takeout. I've been thinking about logistics, he said suddenly. Logistics? Where we go from here? Where we go from here? I live in Phoenix now, moved there after Carol died to be closer to my daughter. You're here. Neither of us is going to uproot our entire lives for what might just be a temporary infatuation. The word stung, even though I knew he was being practical. Is that what you think this is? A temporary infatuation? I hope it's more than that, he said carefully, but we have to be realistic. We're not kids who can just follow our hearts without considering the consequences. I set down my wine glass, suddenly feeling foolish. You're right, of course. We have grandchildren, responsibilities, medical appointments. We can't just play house like we're 20. That's not what I meant, Michael said quickly, reaching for my hand. I'm not saying this isn't real or important. I'm saying we need to figure out how to make it work in the real world. I looked at him, this man who had re-entered my life like a tornado, disrupting everything I thought I knew about my future. What are you suggesting? I don't know yet, he admitted. Maybe we take turns visiting each other. Maybe we find a place that's halfway between Phoenix and here. Maybe we're old enough and crazy enough to just see where this leads without worrying about the practical stuff. Despite my fears, I found myself smiling. My practical English teacher brain is screaming at me to make lists and plan everything out. And what's your heart telling you? I closed my eyes, trying to quiet the anxious chatter in my head and listen to what I actually wanted. When I opened them again, Michael was watching me with that same intense expression he'd worn when we were teenagers, and he was trying to memorize my face. My heart is telling me that I haven't felt this alive in years, I said quietly, that maybe, just maybe, I deserve a second chance at happiness. We both do, he said firmly. The question is whether we're brave enough to take it. 2 days later, we were walking through the downtown farmers market when Michael suddenly stopped in front of a vendor selling handmade jewelry. He studied the display case for a long moment, then pointed to a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. "That one," he told the vendor. "Could I see that one?" I watched in confusion as he examined the ring, turning it over in his hands. "Michael, what are you doing?" He turned to me with a nervous smile. "This is going to sound completely insane, but Maggie, will you marry me?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Around us, the farmers market continued its cheerful bustle, but all I could hear was the roar of blood in my ears. "What?" "I know it's crazy. I know we've only been together for 2 weeks. But I'm 70 years old, Maggie. I don't have time to waste on long courtships and careful planning. I love you. I've always loved you. And I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy." "Michael," I started, but he held up his hand. "Before you say no, hear me out. We're not 20-year-olds who think love conquers all. We know how hard marriage can be, how much work it takes, how many compromises are necessary. But we also know how precious it is to find someone who truly understands you, who sees all your flaws and loves you anyway." My head was spinning. This is insane. People our age don't do things like this. "Says who?" He stepped closer, taking my hands in his. "Who made that rule? Why should we follow a timeline that doesn't fit our lives?" I looked around at the other market goers, half expecting someone to intervene and tell us we were being ridiculous. But nobody was paying attention to the 2 seniors having a life-changing conversation next to the jewelry booth. "What about our families, our children? We can't just announce that we're getting married after knowing each other for 2 weeks. We've known each other for 46 years, Michael corrected gently. "We're just picking up where we left off." "That's not how it works," I protested, but even as I said it, I could feel my resistance weakening. There was something intoxicating about his certainty, his willingness to leap without looking. "How about this?" he said, still holding the ring. "What if we get engaged? Not married tomorrow, but engaged. Give ourselves time to figure out the details, but make a commitment to try." "An engagement ring from a farmer's market?" I said with a shaky laugh. "That's very romantic." "It's perfect," he said seriously. "Simple, unpretentious, real, just like us." I stared at the ring, this simple circle of silver that represented such an enormous leap of faith. 2 weeks ago, I'd been a widow living a quiet, predictable life. Now I was being asked to trust my heart to the man who had broken it decades earlier. "What if it doesn't work?" I whispered. "What if we're too set in our ways, too different now?" "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. "But what if it does work? What if we're exactly what each other needs?" I thought about Sarah's words, about Robert's deathbed wish for my happiness, about the way I felt when Michael looked at me like I was still the most beautiful woman in the world. Life was short and uncertain. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Maybe it was time to be brave. "Yes," I said quietly. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, Michael Davidson. I'll take this crazy, impractical, wonderful leap with you." The smile that spread across his face was radiant as he slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting 44 years for this moment. Around us, the farmers market continued its Saturday morning rhythm, oblivious to the fact that 2 people in their 60s had just decided to rewrite the rest of their lives. But as Michael kissed me there among the vegetables and flowers, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of phone calls, family meetings, and gentle chaos. Sarah was thrilled, David was skeptical but supportive, and Michael's children were a mixture of confused and cautiously optimistic. There were practical matters to discuss: where we would live, how we would handle finances, what would happen to our respective houses. But through it all, I felt a sense of rightness that surprised me. This wasn't the desperate passion of youth or the comfortable companionship I'd expected from a second relationship. It was something entirely new, a mature love built on shared history, mutual respect, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from living through both joy and sorrow. We decided on a small ceremony in my backyard, just family and a few close friends. It felt appropriate somehow, intimate, personal, rooted in the place where I'd built my life with Robert, but open to the future I was building with Michael. The night before the wedding, I sat in my bedroom looking through photo albums, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. There were pictures of Robert and me on our wedding day, young and hopeful and convinced we had forever. Photos of our children at various stages, family vacations, holiday celebrations, the ordinary moments that had made up our extraordinary life together. And then there were the older photos, my high school yearbook, pictures from prom, the few snapshots I'd kept of Michael and me together. Looking at them now, I could see the threads that connected that girl to the woman I'd become, the ways that first love had shaped my understanding of what it meant to choose someone completely. A soft knock on my door interrupted my reverie. "Come in," I called, expecting Sarah or maybe my sister. Instead, Michael appeared in the doorway, looking sheepish. I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding, but I couldn't sleep. "Cold feet?" I asked, patting the bed beside me. "Warm feet," he corrected, settling next to me and looking at the photos spread across the comforter. "Actually, I wanted to give you something." He pulled a small wrapped package from his pocket. "I know we're doing this backwards, engagement ring from a farmer's market, wedding planning in 3 weeks, but I wanted to do this part right." Inside the package was a simple gold band, clearly vintage, with a small inscription on the inside that read, "Forever and Always, 1977. "It was Carol's," he said quietly. "I know that might seem strange, but she specifically asked me to give it to you if this ever happened." I stared at the ring, overwhelmed by the generosity of a woman I'd never met. She knew about me? She knew about us. The night before she died, she made me promise that if I ever found you again, I wouldn't waste time being cautious or worried about what people would think. She said life was too short for second chances to be squandered. Tears blurred my vision as I slipped the ring onto my finger next to the turquoise engagement ring. I wish I could have known her. "She would have loved you, Michael," said with certainty, "just like Robert would have loved me, I think." "Yes," I agreed, thinking of my gentle husband and his generous heart. He would have. We sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the evidence of lives well lived and love well chosen. Tomorrow we would promise to love each other through whatever came next: illness, loss, the inevitable indignities of aging, and hopefully many more moments of joy and connection. "Are you ready for this?" Michael asked, gathering up the photos and helping me close the albums. "I'm terrified," I admitted, "but I'm also more excited than I've been in years." "That sounds about right," he said, kissing my forehead. "Sweet dreams, soon to be Mrs. Davidson." "Sweet dreams, my love." After he left, I lay in bed, thinking about the girl I'd been and the woman I'd become, about first loves and second chances, about the courage it takes to keep opening your heart even after it's been broken. Outside my window, the October wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of change and the whisper of new beginnings. Tomorrow, I would marry the boy who had broken my heart and become the man who had healed it. And for the first time in 2 years, I couldn't wait to see what happened next. Our wedding day dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden October light that makes everything look like it's been touched by magic. I woke up early, not from nerves, but from excitement, and spent the morning puttering around the house, making sure everything was perfect for our small gathering. Sarah arrived at noon with her hair and makeup supplies, insisting that even a 62-year-old bride deserved to be pampered on her wedding day. As she worked on my face, chattering about the flowers and the caterer and the string quartet we'd hired, I felt a sense of surreal contentment wash over me. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Radiant. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized, not because I looked dramatically different, but because the sadness that had lived in my eyes for the past 2 years had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like joy. My dress was simple but elegant, cream-colored silk that skimmed my figure without trying too hard to reclaim my youth. I'd chosen it because it made me feel confident and beautiful, but also because it was completely different from the elaborate gown I'd worn to marry Robert. This was a different woman, a different kind of love, a different beginning. At 3 o'clock, our guests began arriving, both of our families, a few close friends, some former colleagues from my teaching days. The backyard had been transformed with white chairs arranged in neat rows, an arch of autumn flowers where we would take our vows, and small tables scattered around the patio for the reception afterward. I watched from my bedroom window as Michael greeted people, looking handsome and confident in his dark gray suit. His children and grandchildren had flown in from Phoenix, and seeing him surrounded by his family made my heart swell with happiness and a touch of nervousness. Would they accept me? Would we be able to blend our complicated histories into something that worked? "Ready?" Sarah asked, appearing beside me with my bouquet, simple white roses mixed with the same turquoise that matched my engagement ring. "Ready," I said, and meant it. The ceremony itself was a blur of emotion and laughter and tears. Michael's youngest grandson served as ring bearer, carrying our bands on a small pillow with the utmost seriousness of a 7-year-old entrusted with an important job. My nephew officiated, reading words we'd written ourselves about second chances and the courage to love again. When it came time for our vows, Michael took my hands and spoke directly to my heart. "Maggie, you taught me what love could be when we were just kids, and you're teaching me what love can become when we're old enough to know how precious it is. I promise to cherish every day we have together, to support your dreams and comfort your fears, and to love you with the wisdom that comes from understanding how rare and beautiful real partnership is." Through my tears, I managed to speak my own promises. "Michael, you've shown me that it's never too late to be surprised by life, never too late to take a chance on happiness. I promise to grow old with you gracefully and ungracefully, to laugh with you, to challenge you, and to love you with everything I've learned about what love really means." When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, Michael kissed me with a tenderness that spoke of patience and gratitude and hope. Around us, our families cheered and laughed, and I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The reception was everything I'd hoped for: relaxed, joyful, full of good food and good conversation. My new stepchildren shared embarrassing stories about Michael's terrible cooking and his obsession with old westerns. Sarah told tales of my grading papers at the kitchen table in my pajamas and my habit of talking to the characters in books like they were real people. As the sun began to set, the string quartet started playing The Way You Look Tonight, and Michael led me onto the small dance floor we'd set up on the patio. As we swayed together, I caught glimpses of our guests watching us with expressions of genuine happiness and, in some cases, amazement. I suppose we were an unusual sight, 2 people in their 60s dancing at their own wedding like teenagers in love. "Any regrets?" Michael whispered in my ear. I looked around at the faces of everyone we cared about, thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment, considered the uncertainty and adventure that lay ahead. "Not a single one," I said truthfully. "Good," he said, spinning me around in a move that made me laugh out loud, "because I plan to spend the rest of our lives making sure you never have any." As the music played and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I realized that this was what happiness looked like at 62. Not the desperate intensity of young love, but something deeper and more sustainable. It was the knowledge that love could surprise you at any age, that it was never too late to rewrite your story, that sometimes the best chapters come at the very end. Michael was right. We didn't have time to waste on being careful or practical or worried about what other people thought. We had love and time and each other. And for now, that was more than enough. Later that night, as we sat on the porch swing Robert had hung for me years earlier, still in our wedding clothes but barefoot and relaxed, Michael took my hand and smiled. "So, Mrs. Davidson," he said, "what do you want to do with the rest of our lives?" I looked out at the garden where I'd said goodbye to my old life and hello to my new one, felt the weight of Carol's ring on my finger and the warmth of Michael's hand in mine, and realized that for the first time in 2 years, the future felt full of possibilities instead of empty spaces. "Everything," I said simply. "I want to do everything." And as we sat there together, two people who had found their way back to each other after 44 years of separate lives, I knew that everything was exactly what we were going to do.